Hey, what is up, tech enthusiasts? Bo HD here, and in my hands I have the Motorola DROID Turbo. It's a phone that has insanely great specs, but is exclusive to Verizon. It's a device that features many of the same specs found in the Nexus 6, but in a smaller size and package. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this phone and see what it's really capable of by first taking a look at the hardware. So the DROID Turbo is one of those phones that has two distinctly different designs depending on which version you select. You can choose from the red Kevlar version or the black ballistic nylon version, and both are different in terms of how they feel. The red Kevlar back feels like plastic. I mean, Kevlar itself is like plastic, but it's an insanely strong version of plastic that consists of fibers actually strong enough to stop a bullet if woven into a sheet. So that's pretty cool and all, but it does still, feel like plastic. The ballistic nylon version, on the other hand, feels like a speaker grill, if that makes sense. It uses woven nylon fibers to create a very interesting texture that feels very unusual in the hands, but unusual in a good way. It still can be a bit slick, but if I had to choose between the two, I'd have to go with this version unless you really like the color red and prefer style over functionality. But if we take a look around the device, we'll find nothing on the left-hand side, the power sleep on-off button and volume up and down controls that hide the SIM card slot on the right-hand side, the 3.5mm headphone jack up top, and the micro USB charging cable down below. On the front we have a stereo speaker port up top. It's just one long and a narrow port, and the speaker quality is pretty good. I really like how it's front-facing, but it's not quite as good sounding as dual stereo speakers found on the HTC M8 or Nexus 6, unfortunately. But below that is the 2-megapixel front-facing camera, and then all the way down below is the 3 capacitive touch buttons for the back, home, and menu commands. They're alright. I would have liked to have seen the bezel reduced in favor of software navigation buttons and a larger display, but they get the job done. The back does feature a 20.7-megapixel rear-facing camera and a dual LED flash that we will definitely talk more about later. But just overall, the phone feels very solid in the hands. It's definitely a comfortable size in the hands. It's not too terribly heavy, and it feels like it's a premium, well-built phone, which is always a good thing. If we power on the display, the DROID Turbo features a 5.2-inch 2K resolution display that really looks great. It's an AMOLED display, so blacks are space black, and colors are very vibrant. It's not as crisp or saturated as a Samsung AMOLED panel. In a lot of ways, it actually reminds me of an LCD panel. My only complaint with the display that actually applies to the Moto X as well, and that is that the whites are very yellow. You'll definitely notice they're not as white as a Nexus or iPhone panel, unfortunately. I don't know if this is a software thing on Motorola's part or if it's a hardware issue, but nevertheless, it is definitely noticeable. But as for the performance of the DROID Turbo, there's really a reason why they call it the DROID Turbo, because this thing is a speed beast. It packs a Snapdragon 805 quad-core processor with 3GB of RAM and an Adreno 420 GPU, and yeah, this phone can open and close applications with really no problems at all. Multitasking is a breeze, and just overall, this phone feels like a really fast Motorola phone. I especially like how the software is very minimalistic. It sort of resembles stock Android KitKat in almost every way. Everything from the icons to the settings drawer, it's all very stock Android-esque. And I really like that. It really seems to keep the phone fast and relatively hiccup-free. There are a few Motorola features that I found really useful. The first is active notifications. So basically it takes advantage of the AMOLED display and actually illuminates the notifications when the display is off using very little power, and it's just a great feature that makes viewing notifications much more easy and convenient. I also surprisingly enjoyed the gesture controls it has, like the ability to wave your hand across the screen to show the notifications. I actually didn't think I'd actually use it, but I did, and it works well. It actually worked all the time. The other Motorola feature worth mentioning though is the always listening voice commands. So basically you can program the Turbo to respond to a specific word or phrase regardless of whether or not the phone is on or asleep. You can just say the programmed phrase whenever you like, and it'll boot up Google Now, where you can ask it all sorts of questions. It's a pretty neat feature. I actually didn't use it a lot, but it could be very useful in certain situations where you're not next to your phone. Now, the DROID Turbo does feature a 20.7-megapixel rear-facing camera that I mentioned earlier, and that actually sounds like an absolute beast of a sensor, and it is pretty good, but it's not as good as you'd think it would be. I mean, camera quality is hit or miss. Sometimes it's excellent, other times it's just really not very detailed, and the colors are kind of muted. And when you view the pictures on your phone, they're going to look a little bit more yellow than they actually are, since the display, like I said earlier, tends to make things more yellow than they should be. But the 20.7 megapixel camera sensor does allow you to crop pictures and still retain a lot of quality, so that's nice. Video quality is really nice though. It carries over sort of a similar story as the camera, in that the quality isn't going to pop since it's not very saturated. The only problem I found with the video quality is that the footage is very shaky, and that's just because there's no optical image stabilization, so videos and pictures will tend to be a little bit blurry if you don't have a steady hand. But overall, the camera is very good. It's just not as good as it should be, nor is it as good as, say, the Note 4. But arguably one of my favorite aspects of the Turbo is the massive 3900 mAh battery. It's massive, and it's probably my favorite feature because it allows me to use this device for long periods of time. I can get a little over 6 hours of screen on time, which is more than I usually get on most devices I use. And for the past couple of weeks I've had this device, I've literally only been charging it for every 2 days, and it's gotten me by pretty much fine. There were some days where I'd have to charge it during the day, but it features turbocharging, so it can charge 8 hours worth of battery life in 15 minutes, says Motorola. And you know, that's pretty true, although it's 8 hours standby time, which isn't actually as impressive as screen on time, that's for sure. And so overall, the Droid Turbo is a beast of a phone, but it's only available on Verizon. With that said though, it is the best Verizon exclusive phone they have ever made. All of the specs are top notch. This phone will definitely be able to last you at least 2 years if you sign a 2-year contract, and for a starting price of $199, this phone is absolutely worth it. Personally, I prefer the black ballistic nylon version just because I think it feels a little bit better in the hands, but I could absolutely see why you might prefer the red version just because it definitely looks stylish. But the big question you should be asking yourself is, should you get this phone or the Nexus 6? And that really depends on the software and the display. I'm not going to dive too far into that in this video, but basically if you're not afraid of wielding a 6-inch display, then go with the Nexus 6. And if you want pure stock unaltered Android, then the Nexus 6 would also be the better option, although the Motorola skin on the Droid Turbo is literally the next best thing to stock Android. Oh, and if you want the latest and greatest software update right as they are released, then you're kind of out of luck regardless of which phone you choose, because Verizon is going to be in charge of all that and not the OEMs. But yeah, with that said, let me know what your thoughts are of the Motorola Droid Turbo by leaving me a comment down below. This has been my review. I'm BoHD from How To and More. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.